The morning wind was a liar. It came down from the bitter roots smelling of pine and cold stone, promising a clean, honest winter. But I knew better. Here in Parsons Bluff, Montana, the wind was just the opening line to a story that always ended in foreclosure or a funeral. I stood barefoot on the porch of the home my husband's grandfather had built, feeling the rot in the floorboards right up through the soles of my feet. My back ached. My belly was tight as a drum. 8 months of waiting and worrying packed inside me. The house groaned behind me, a sound I knew too well. It was the sound of a legacy turning to dust. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent jab against my ribs. A little fighter, just like her father. "Easy now, little one," I whispered, my voice as cracked as the porch posts. "You're not the only one stuck waiting." Levi, my husband, had been gone 7 months. They called it a barn accident. Quick, they said. Brutal, they said. All I knew was the image of his boots sticking out from under a collapsed wall of hay bales and a crimson stain spreading through the dust like a sunrise gone wrong. I was the one who found him. I was the one whose scream sent the hawks circling over the canyon. Now all I had left was the ranch, the debt, and the auction. That God-forsaken auction, held every second Saturday in the courthouse square. A place where they stood men on a wooden platform and sold their labor like they were cattle. Not with money, not at first. They bid with room and board, a cot in a barn, a place at the table, a few dollars a month if you could spare it. It was a market of desperation for both the sellers and the buyers, and I was about to become a buyer. Martha Ellison, Levi's godmother and the only family I had left, had put the idea in my head. "You can't run 1,000 acres alone with a baby on your hip," she'd said, her voice sharp as barbed wire. "Pride don't keep the snow from caving in your roof." She was right. The bank didn't care about my pride. The county inspector, who'd slapped an unfit notice on the barn door, didn't care. The $19,800 in back mortgage payments certainly didn't care. Survival was a colder, harder thing than pride. So I pulled on Levi's old ranch jacket, the one that still smelled of cedar and earth, and I grabbed my checkbook. I had $229 to my name. It wasn't a bid. It was a prayer. But as I stood there on that porch, feeling the wind cut through me, I knew I had no other choice. I was going to the auction. I had to buy a man to save my husband's ranch. What I didn't know was that I wasn't just buying a pair of hands. I was buying a past I never knew existed, and a future I couldn't possibly imagine. And it would all start the moment he stepped onto that platform. The courthouse square was a circle of vultures, farmers with failed crops, widows with broken-down homesteads, all of us drawn to the same carcass of hope. The men for sale stood off to the side, a lineup of ghosts. They were mechanics with no garages, soldiers with no wars, cowboys with no herds. Each one carried the same look in his eyes, the hollowed-out shame of a man who had nothing left to offer but the strength of his own back. I sat in Martha's old Ford, my hand resting on my belly, feeling like a hypocrite. "They're not property," I muttered. "They're just men who need work." Martha didn't even look at me. "And you're a woman who needs help. Don't romanticize it, Joel. This ain't a dance. You're not buying a husband. You're buying a roof that won't kill you in your sleep." Tommy Eldridge, the auctioneer, stepped onto the platform. He ran the feed store and built his fortune on the late fees of people like me. He tapped the microphone, a squeal of feedback cutting through the quiet chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice slick with false charity, "let's give these good men a second chance." The first man was a kid, barely 20, said he was good with engines. He went for $60 a month and a converted chicken coop. The second was a quiet man with sad eyes who knew horses. He went for $100 in a room over a stable. One by one, they were called up, their skills listed off like features on a new tractor. And then he stepped onto the platform. The air shifted. The murmuring stopped. He wasn't like the others. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, with a stillness that felt ancient. His eyes weren't downcast or shifty. They were a quiet, steady gray-green, and they scanned the crowd without fear or apology. He didn't carry a worn-out duffel bag, just a simple canvas sack and a rolled-up oil coat. Everything about him was clean, cared for, not polished but respected. He stood there like he wasn't on a platform to be sold, but like he was observing the world from a higher place. Next up, Tommy announced a little too loud, we've got Beckett Lane, 33 years old. Says he's done ranch work in 3 states, carpentry, mechanical repair, livestock handling. Served with the 101st Airborne. The bidding exploded. $100, 125, 150. My heart sank into the floor of the truck. This man, Beckett, he wasn't going to be cheap. He carried himself like a man who knew his own worth, even when the world had told him he had none. And then I heard the voice I hated more than any other in Parsons Bluff. 250, Richard Keene called out. He stepped out from behind his glossy black truck, the town banker, a man who feasted on foreclosures. He owned the mortgages on half the properties in the valley, including mine. He stared at Beckett, not like he was looking at a man, but like he was assessing prize cattle. 300, Keene added, a smug smirk on his face, a bid designed to kill all competition. But Beckett didn't even flinch. He just stood there watching, waiting. And that's when I knew I couldn't let Keene have him. I opened the truck door. "Joelle, don't," Martha hissed. "You can't outbid him." I didn't look at her. "I'm not going to," I said. I walked through the crowd, my swollen belly leading the way. The whispers followed me, a few snickers, a woman muttering, "Lord, have mercy." I ignored them all. I stopped right in front of the platform and looked up at Beckett Lane. My voice didn't shake. "I can't offer 300, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What I can offer is $50 a month, a dry place to sleep, hot meals, and a ranch that needs more work than any one person can handle." I took a breath, my eyes never leaving his. "I can't give you much, but I can promise you this. I'll treat you like a man, not a commodity." The silence that fell over the square was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the gravel. Richard Keene let out a barking laugh. "You've got to be joking, Joel. This isn't a charity. You can't just make up your own rules." But before Tommy the auctioneer could agree, another voice cut through the air, a voice that was low, calm, and held the weight of thunder. It was Beckett's. "I'll take her offer," he said. He stepped off the platform, leaving a stunned Tommy Eldridge with his mouth hanging open. He walked right past Richard Keene without a glance. He stopped in front of me, tipping his head in a gesture of respect. There was no smile, just a quiet intensity in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. "If the offer is still open, ma'am," he said, his voice softer now, "I'd be honored to work your land." I could only nod, my throat tight with a feeling I couldn't name. As he picked up his simple canvas sack, I saw something that made me freeze. On the inside of his wrist, peeking out from under his cuff, was a tattoo, a small, stylized raven in flight. My blood ran cold. It was the exact same tattoo my dead husband, Levi, had. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a heavy silence, thick with the unspoken question of that tattoo. I wanted to ask. I needed to ask. But how do you ask a stranger you just bought at an auction if he knows your dead husband's secrets? Beckett sat in the bed of the truck, claiming he preferred the open air. I watched him in the rearview mirror. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the land, on the sagging fence lines and the collapsed corner of the barn roof. He studied the decay with a carpenter's eye, seeing not the ruin, but the work that needed to be done. There was no judgment on his face, just a quiet assessment. It was the look of a man who wasn't afraid of broken things. When we pulled into the driveway, he was out of the truck bed before I'd even turned off the engine. He started unloading the sacks of grain and the coil of fencing wire I'd picked up, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of years of hard labor. He didn't wait to be asked. He just saw what needed doing and did it. Martha pointed him toward the old bunkhouse, a small cabin that hadn't been used in years. I'd cleaned it up as best I could, but it was still just a room with a cot, a wood stove, and 4 bare walls. Beckett gave it a single nod, set down his canvas sack, and immediately turned back to the ranch. He didn't even look inside. The first thing he chose to fix wasn't the gaping hole in the barn roof or the busted pump by the creek. It was the barn door. It was warped and swollen, and it screeched on its rusted hinges every time I opened it, a sound like something in pain. A small thing, but a constant, nagging reminder of the ranch's slow death. Beckett took it apart piece by piece. He sanded the wood, hammered the hinges straight, and reinforced the frame with iron brackets he'd salvaged from an old forgotten cattle chute. He worked with a silent, focused intensity. By sunset, the door slid open smooth as a whisper. I stood there watching, and for the first time in 7 months, the sound of the barn wasn't a sound of decay. It was a sound of purpose. That night, I made a simple stew. When I called him in for supper, he hesitated at the kitchen door, his boots clean, his hat in his hands, as if he was waiting for permission to cross the threshold into our lives. He ate quietly, his eyes on his plate. The tattoo was hidden again beneath the cuff of his shirt. The silence stretched between us, and the question burned on my tongue. "You know this land well?" I asked instead, my voice sounding small in the big kitchen. He looked up, his gray-green eyes meeting mine. "I've worked land like it," he said. "Different states, same sky." It wasn't an answer. It was a deflection. After he finished, he thanked me for the meal and headed back to the bunkhouse. I watched him go, his silhouette a dark shape against the rising moon. Martha was washing the dishes, her back to me. "He's a hard worker," she said, her voice quiet. "But there's something else there, Joelle. He's running from something. Men like that, they're either running from the law or from a memory. You better hope it's a memory." I didn't answer. I just walked over to the drawer where I kept Levi's things. I pulled out an old photo of him and his army buddies taken somewhere hot and dusty. They were all young, grinning, arms slung around each other, and there on Levi's wrist was the raven tattoo. I scanned the other faces in the photo, my heart pounding. But it was no use. They were all wearing long sleeves. The secret remained hidden. But I had a terrible feeling that whatever Beckett was running from, he had run straight back into it, right here on this ranch. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. Beckett was up before the sun, and he worked until long after it had set. He moved with a relentless energy, as if he was trying to outrun a thought that was chasing him. He patched the barn roof, his hammer echoing across the valley in a steady, reassuring beat. He restrung the southern fence line, his hands moving with a speed and precision that was almost hypnotic. He never complained. He never asked for help. He just worked. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to mend the broken bones of the ranch. But he was also building a wall. He kept his distance, speaking only when necessary. Our conversations were about fence posts and feed costs, not about the past, not about tattoos, but I saw things. I saw the way he would stop sometimes in the middle of a field and stare off at the Bitterroot Mountains, his face a mask of something I couldn't read. I saw the way his hands, scarred and calloused as they were, would sometimes tremble when he thought no one was looking. And one afternoon I saw something that chilled me to the bone. I was bringing him a glass of water out by the creek, where he was wrestling with the busted pump. He didn't hear me approach over the sound of the clanking metal. I saw him pull a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. He didn't take out money. He took out a small, faded photograph. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb gently tracing the image. His shoulders slumped, and a look of such profound, devastating grief crossed his face that it stole the breath from my lungs. He looked like a man staring into an open grave. He must have felt my presence, because he quickly shoved the photo back into his wallet and stood up, his face once again a blank, unreadable wall. "Pumps seized up worse than I thought," he said, his voice rough. "The main valve is cracked. Looks like it's been that way for a while." He was already back to business, the moment of vulnerability gone, as if it had never happened. But I had seen it. I knew that whatever ghost haunted him, they were not small ones. Later that day, the pressure became too much. I had to know. As he was cleaning the tools by the barn, I walked over, my heart thumping against my ribs. "Beckett," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "that tattoo on your wrist, my husband, he had the same one." He stopped what he was doing. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the wrench in his hand, his knuckles white. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. "It's a unit tattoo," he said finally, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The 101st Airborne. A lot of guys got them." He was lying, or at least he was telling a half-truth. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. Levi had told me it was from a smaller specialized group within the 101st, a tight-knit team. He'd never told me their names. It was another secret he had kept locked away. "Did you know him?" I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. "Levi Tatum?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold as river stones. "No," he said. The word was sharp, final. A door slamming shut. He turned and walked away, heading back to the bunkhouse, leaving me standing alone in the fading light. The lie hung in the air between us, heavy and poisonous. He did know Levi. I was certain of it. And if he was lying about that, what else was he lying about? Why was he here? It wasn't for $50 a month and a warm meal. He had come to this ranch for a reason. And I was starting to suspect that his reason and the reason for my husband's accidental death were one and the same. The lie changed everything. The work continued, the ranch slowly breathing back to life under Beckett's hands. But the space between us was now charged with suspicion. I watched him constantly, searching for clues, for any slip that might reveal the truth. He was a fortress, quiet, efficient, impenetrable. He fixed the pump, coaxing it back to life with a patience that was almost holy. He mended the stable stalls. He even started re-shingling the porch roof. He was saving my home, but I felt less safe than ever. Who was this man sleeping just 100 yards from my door? This man who shared my husband's past but refused to admit it. The answer came from the one place I never expected. Richard Keene. The banker showed up one afternoon, his polished truck kicking up a cloud of dust that settled over the porch like a shroud. He didn't come to talk about the mortgage. He came to gloat. He found me weeding the small garden near the house, my back screaming in protest. "Well, Joel," he said, leaning against his truck, a smug smile playing on his lips. "I see you and your charity case are keeping busy. Trying to put lipstick on a pig, are we?" I ignored him and kept pulling weeds. "What do you want, Richard?" "I just came to deliver this," he said, holding up a thick envelope. "A formal notice. The bank is accelerating your loan. The full amount is due in 30 days. If not, we foreclose." My blood ran cold. 30 days. It was impossible. He knew it was impossible. He was enjoying this, enjoying my powerlessness. "You can't do that," I said, my voice shaking. "Oh, I can," he sneered. "But I'm a reasonable man. Sign the deed over to me, and I'll forgive the debt. You can walk away clean." He wanted the land. He'd always wanted it, for the water rights from the creek. Levi had refused to sell to him a dozen times. "Get off my property," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He just chuckled. "Feisty. I like that. But you should be careful who you trust, Joel. That new ranch hand of yours, for instance. You ever wonder why a man with his skills ended up on an auction block?" He paused for effect, letting the question hang in the air. "I did a little digging on your Mr. Lane. It's amazing what you can find out with a few phone calls." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's not just some drifter, Joel. He's a wanted man." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" He smiled, a predator's smile. "Not by the law, not officially. But there are people looking for him. Very powerful people. Seems our quiet Mr. Lane left a real mess back in Oregon. A wife who died under mysterious circumstances. A wealthy family with a lot of questions. They think he got away with murder." The word hit me like a physical blow. Murder. The image of Beckett staring at that faded photograph flashed in my mind. The profound grief on his face. Could that have been a lie too? Was it guilt? "You're a liar," I whispered, but the words had no conviction. Keene just shrugged. "Am I? Ask him. Ask him about Olivia. Ask him why her family has a private investigator tracking his every move. He's not here to save you, Joel. He's here to hide. And he's brought his trouble right to your doorstep." He tossed the foreclosure notice onto the porch steps. 30 days, Joel." He got back in his truck and drove away, leaving me standing there, the world tilting on its axis. Keene was a snake, but even snakes sometimes tell the truth, especially when it serves their purpose. I looked toward the barn, where I could hear the steady rhythm of Beckett's hammer. Was he a savior or a killer? Was he hiding from a memory, like Martha said? Or was he hiding from a crime? And the most terrifying question of all, was my husband's death connected to the death of Beckett's wife? Had Levi known something that got him killed? The ranch suddenly felt like a trap, and I was locked inside with a man who was either an angel of mercy or a devil in disguise. Keene's words were a poison that seeped into everything. Every time I looked at Beckett, I saw not just a hard-working man, but a potential murderer. The quiet way he moved, which I'd once seen as calming, now seemed stealthy. His silence, which I'd respected as a sign of his own grief, now felt like a carefully constructed wall to hide his secrets. The foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen table, a constant reminder that my time was running out. I had 30 days to uncover the truth, or lose everything. I had to confront him. I couldn't live like this, sharing my home with a man who might be a monster. I waited until that night, after our silent supper. He was about to head back to the bunkhouse when I spoke his wife's name. "Olivia," I said. The name just hung in the air between us. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. He didn't turn around, but I saw his entire body go rigid. "Richard Keene paid me a visit today," I continued, my voice shaking slightly. "He told me things about you, about your wife. He said her family thinks you killed her." The silence in the room was so complete I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I expected him to deny it, to get angry, to tell me Keene was a liar, but he didn't. He slowly turned to face me. The look in his eyes wasn't anger or guilt. It was a weariness so profound it seemed to carve new lines into his face. It was the look of a man who had been carrying a mountain on his back for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Her family has a lot of money," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. "When you have that much money, you can buy any story you want to believe." He walked over to the fireplace and leaned against the mantel, staring into the cold, empty hearth. "Olivia was my wife," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "She died of cancer. It was fast and it was brutal, and it took everything from me." He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the truth. It wasn't the truth of a murderer. It was the truth of a man who had watched the love of his life wither away and had been powerless to stop it. Her family, they never approved of me. I was just a ranch hand from a poor family. They thought she married beneath her. When she got sick, they wanted to fly her to fancy clinics, try experimental treatments. But Olivia knew. She knew she was out of time. She just wanted to be home, on our land. She wanted to die in the house we built together. His voice broke on the last few words. "When she passed," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "her family accused me of neglecting her, of keeping her from life-saving care. They said I let her die. They hired lawyers, private investigators. They made my life a living hell. So I left. I left it all behind. The ranch, the house, everything. I just started driving. I thought if I ran far enough, I could outrun the memory of her. But you can't." The story poured out of him, raw and unfiltered. But there was a piece missing. I knew there was. "The photograph," I said softly. "The one you carry in your wallet." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn leather wallet. He took out the faded picture and handed it to me. My breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of a smiling, beautiful woman with bright, laughing eyes. And she was pregnant. Her hands were cradling a small, round belly. "We were going to have a son," Beckett said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "She was 16 weeks along when they found the cancer. The doctors said, they said the treatment might save her, but it would kill the baby. She refused. She chose him. She said if she only had time to give life to one of them, it would be him." Tears streamed down my face as I stared at the photo. I placed my own hand on my belly, feeling the life inside me. I couldn't imagine the agony of that choice. "The cancer was too aggressive," he whispered. "We lost them both." He took the photo back from me, his movements slow and reverent. "So now you know," he said, his gaze distant. "I'm not a murderer. I'm just a man who failed to save the only two people he ever loved." He had answered my question, but in doing so, he had raised 100 more. Keene's story was a lie, a twisted version of a tragic truth. But that didn't explain the tattoo. It didn't explain why he was here, on my ranch. And it didn't explain why. When he looked at me, I saw not just a shared grief, but a flash of something else. Something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. His confession shattered the wall between us, but it replaced it with a bridge of shared sorrow. The suspicion was gone, but a new, more complicated tension took its place. We were no longer just a desperate widow and a hired hand. We were two people haunted by the ghosts of the spouses and children we'd lost. The ranch felt different now. The work was the same, but the silence was filled with unspoken understanding. I stopped seeing a potential killer and started seeing a man drowning in a grief as deep as my own. A few days later, while clearing out a corner of the barn that hadn't been touched since before Levi died, Beckett found it. It was an old military footlocker tucked away beneath a stack of rotted canvases. Levi's name was stenciled on the side, SGTL Tatum. Beckett stood over it for a long moment, his face unreadable. "You should open it," he said, his voice quiet. "There might be things you want to keep." I hesitated. I hadn't been able to bring myself to go through Levi's personal effects. It felt too final, like admitting he was really gone forever. But looking at Beckett, at the quiet strength in his face, I felt a surge of courage. Together we pried open the rusted clasps. The trunk was filled with the relics of a life I knew little about. His dress uniform folded neatly, a collection of medals I didn't recognize, bundles of letters tied with string, and at the bottom a thick, leather-bound journal. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I'd never seen it before. It was another secret he'd kept. I opened it to a random page. Levi's familiar scrawl filled the paper. It wasn't about the ranch. It was about his time in the service, about his unit. He wrote about the men he served with, their jokes, their fears, their bond. And then I saw the name. Beckett. My head snapped up. I looked at him, the journal open in my hands. "You lied to me," I whispered. "You told me you didn't know him." Beckett didn't deny it this time. He just nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the journal. "We served together," he said. "We were in the same unit, the one with the raven tattoo." The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture I didn't understand. But why? Why lie about it? Why come here? He ran a hand over his face, the weariness back in his eyes. "It's complicated, Joelle." "I'm tired of complicated," I said, my voice rising. "My husband is dead. My ranch is being foreclosed on. And the man I hired to help me has been lying to me since the moment he arrived. I deserve the truth." He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into deep water. "Levi saved my life over there," he said. "We were pinned down. He pulled me out. I owe him everything." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "After we got out, we went our separate ways. But we kept in touch. He called me about 8 months ago. He was in some kind of trouble, Joelle. Deep trouble." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What kind of trouble?" He wouldn't say exactly, just that he'd gotten tangled up with the wrong people. He mentioned Richard Keene. He said Keene had him leveraged, that he was being blackmailed. Blackmailed? Levi? It didn't make any sense. "He said if anything ever happened to him, I should come check on you. He made me promise." The world spun. Levi's death wasn't an accident. Keene's foreclosure notice wasn't just business. It was all connected. The barn. The accident. I couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't think it was an accident, Joelle," Beckett said, his voice grim. "When I fixed that barn door, I saw something. One of the main support beams near where the hay bales fell, it had been sawed partway through. It was old damage disguised to look like rot. But it was deliberate. Someone wanted that roof to collapse." We stood there in the dusty barn, the truth hanging between us, more terrifying than any lie. My husband hadn't died in a tragic accident. He had been murdered, and his killer was the man trying to steal our land. Beckett wasn't here to hide from his past. He was here to fulfill a promise. He was here to protect me from Levi's. The revelation that Levi had been murdered changed the very air I breathed. The wind no longer sounded like a promise of winter. It sounded like a warning. The shadows stretching from the barn in the late afternoon no longer seemed peaceful. They seemed to be hiding secrets. Richard Keene wasn't just a greedy banker. He was a killer. The ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It was evidence in a crime. And Beckett wasn't just a ranch hand. He was my only ally in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The 30-day foreclosure notice wasn't a threat, it was a deadline. Keene was trying to erase the crime scene. We spent hours with Levi's journal searching for clues. It was filled with details about his service, but his entries from the last year of his life were sparse and cryptic. He mentioned the Keene problem several times. He wrote about a debt that wasn't money and a mistake that followed him home. There was one entry, dated just a week before he died, that made my blood run cold. Keene knows about the ledger. He has the proof. He says I go to jail or I sign over the water rights. B knows. He's the only other one who knows. I have to trust him. B? I asked, looking at Beckett. That's me, he said quietly. It's what they called me in the unit. I stared at him. What ledger? What did Levi do? Beckett looked away, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He was still holding something back. Beckett, whatever it is, I need to know. Keene killed my husband for it. He's trying to take my home for it. This is my fight now, too. He finally met my gaze, his eyes filled with a conflict I couldn't decipher. After our last tour, Levi and we took a private security job, corporate stuff, overseas. Easy money, we thought. But the company we were working for, they weren't clean. They were smuggling. We were guarding shipments of illegal weapons. The words hit me like stones. Levi, a smuggler? It was impossible. He was the most honest man I'd ever known. We didn't know what we were doing until it was too late, Beckett continued. We were in too deep. Levi was the one who kept the off-the-books ledger, the real record of what was being moved. It was our insurance policy, proof of who the real criminals were. When we quit, we agreed to keep it buried, forever. He paused, the weight of the confession heavy in the room. Somehow, Keene found out about it. He must have gotten his hands on proof that Levi was involved. That was his leverage. The ledger was the only thing that could implicate the corporation, but it would also implicate Levi. Keene didn't want the corporation. He just wanted the ranch. So that was it. Levi had been trapped. He was a good man who had made one bad decision, and it had cost him his life. Where is the ledger? I asked. Beckett shook his head. I don't know. That's why I'm here. Levi told me he hid it somewhere, on the ranch, somewhere safe. He said it was the only thing that could protect you if something happened to him. We have to find it, Joel. It's the only thing that can prove Keene is a murderer and a blackmailer. It's the only thing that can save this ranch. The search began. We became partners, united by a single purpose. We scoured the house, the barn, the sheds. We looked for loose floorboards, for hollow walls, for anything out of place. We worked against the clock, with Keene's 30-day deadline hanging over our heads. As the days turned into a week, then two, a strange thing happened. The fear was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface. But something else was growing too, a bond. We worked together, side by side, our hands often brushing as we reached for the same tool or lifted the same heavy box. We talked for hours, not just about the search, but about our lives, our dreams, the people we had lost. I told him about Levi, the good parts, the way he laughed, the way he loved this land. And he told me more about Olivia, about the small house they had built with their own hands, about the future they had planned. In sharing our ghosts, we found a strange comfort. We were no longer two lonely people. We were a team. One evening after another fruitless day of searching, we were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The baby kicked, and I winced. Beckett looked over, a soft smile on his face. It was the first time I'd ever seen him truly smile. He's got a strong kick, he said. She, I corrected him, smiling back. I think it's a she. He reached out, his hand hovering over my belly for a moment, before he seemed to think better of it and pulled back. But the gesture lingered in the air between us. In that moment, he wasn't a hired hand or a soldier from my husband's past. He was just a man, a good, kind man who had suffered an unbearable loss. And my heart, which I thought had been broken beyond repair, felt a faint, unfamiliar flutter. It was a dangerous feeling, a treacherous feeling, but it was there. And I think, in the way he looked at me, in the warmth that had replaced the coldness in his eyes, he felt it too. The search for the ledger had become something more. It had become a search for a future that neither of us had ever dared to imagine. We had less than a week left before Keen's deadline. The search had turned up nothing. Desperation was beginning to set in, a cold, creeping dread that tightened its grip with every passing day. We had torn the ranch apart, from the hayloft to the root cellar, and the ledger was nowhere to be found. Think, Beckett, I said one morning, pacing the kitchen floor. Where would a soldier hide something he wanted to keep safe forever? Somewhere no one would ever think to look. Beckett was staring at the half-finished cradle Levi had been building for the baby. It sat in the corner, a beautiful, painful reminder of everything we had lost. He walked over to it, running his hand over the smooth, sanded wood. Levi had been a meticulous carpenter. Every joint was perfect, every curve seamless. He built things to last, Beckett said, his voice distant. He tapped on the solid oak headboard. Then he tapped it again. It made a different sound. Not a solid thud, but a hollow echo. His eyes met mine, a spark of hope igniting between us. He ran his fingers along the bottom edge of the headboard, feeling for a seam, a catch, anything. And then he found it, a tiny, almost invisible indentation. He pressed it, and a section of the wood clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. And inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the ledger. We opened it on the kitchen table, our hands shaking. It was all there. Dates, shipping routes, cargo manifests, names. The names of the corporate executives. The name of the man Keen was protecting. And at the top of every page, Levi's signature. It was the proof we needed. It would not only expose the smuggling ring, but it would prove Keen's motive for blackmail and murder. But it would also send my dead husband's name through the mud. It would destroy his legacy. I felt a wave of nausea. To save the ranch, I had to tarnish the memory of the man who built it. There's another way, Beckett said, as if reading my thoughts. We don't go to the police, not yet. They're too slow, and Keen has friends in the county sheriff's office. We use this to fight him ourselves. The plan was simple, and it was dangerous. We would turn Keen's own tactics against him. We would blackmail the blackmailer. That night, Beckett drove into town. He left a single page from the ledger, a page with the most damning information, in an envelope on Richard Keen's front porch. On it, he'd written a simple message. The auction is over. The price for the ranch is forgiveness of the debt and a signed confession to the murder of Levi Tatum. You have 24 hours. The next day was the longest of my life. Every passing car on the main road made me jump. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching truck. Beckett was a coiled spring of tension. He cleaned and oiled an old hunting rifle he found in the barn, his movements precise and deadly. He wasn't a ranch hand anymore. He was the soldier Levi had served with, a man trained to face down the enemy. He was preparing for a war, and our kitchen was the battlefield. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. There was still no word from Keen. The 24 hours were almost up. He's not going to do it, I whispered, my hope fading. He's going to call our bluff. He's not, Beckett said, his eyes fixed on the long gravel road leading to the house. Men like Keen are cowards. They prey on the weak because they're terrified of anyone who can fight back. He's not thinking about calling our bluff. He's thinking about how to eliminate the threat. Just as he said it, we saw them, a set of headlights moving fast down the road. But it wasn't Keen's glossy black truck. It was a battered, unmarked panel van, and it wasn't slowing down. Get in the cellar, Beckett ordered, grabbing the rifle. Lock the door and don't come out, no matter what you hear. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm not hiding. This is my home. This is my fight. I grabbed the heavy cast iron skillet from the stove. It wasn't a rifle, but it was something. Beckett looked at me, a flicker of a proud smile in his eyes. Stay behind me, was all he said. The van screeched to a halt in the yard. Two men got out. They weren't bankers. They were big, rough-looking men with the dead eyes of hired muscle. They were carrying crowbars. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take the ledger and leave no witnesses. The final battle for the Tatum Ranch was about to begin. The two men advanced on the porch, their movements confident, arrogant. They thought they were dealing with a pregnant widow. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush laid by a combat veteran. Beckett stood just inside the doorway, hidden in the shadows, the rifle held steady against his shoulder. "Last chance to walk away," he called out, his voice calm and deadly. The men just laughed. "Give us the book, old man," one of them snarled, "and maybe we'll leave the pretty lady in one piece." That was all Beckett needed to hear. The first shot wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of the porch light exploding as Beckett shot it out, plunging the yard into near darkness. The two men yelped in surprise. Before they could recover, Beckett was moving. He burst out of the doorway, not as a rancher, but as a soldier. He used the rifle like a club, smashing the butt of it into the first man's jaw with a sickening crunch. The man went down like a sack of rocks. The second man swung his crowbar wildly in the dark. Beckett ducked under the swing, his movements fluid and impossibly fast. He swept the man's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowbar clattered across the porch. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Two men, who had come expecting an easy fight, were lying on the ground, groaning in pain. Beckett stood over them, his chest heaving, the rifle now pointed directly at the second man's head. "Who sent you?" Beckett's voice was ice. "Keen," the man whimpered, terror in his eyes. "He sent us for the ledger. He said to clean up the mess." Beckett's face was grim in the moonlight. He had been right. Keen wasn't a negotiator. He was a snake who sent others to do his dirty work. He pulled some zip ties from his pocket, something he must have prepared earlier, and tied the two men's hands and feet. Just as he finished, another set of headlights appeared, coming down the road. This time it was Keen's truck. He must have been waiting down the road, expecting his men to signal him when the job was done. He pulled into the yard, his headlights illuminating the scene on the porch. His two hired thugs tied up on the ground, and Beckett standing over them with a rifle. Keen's face went pale. He tried to slam the truck into reverse, but it was too late. Beckett fired a single, precise shot into the truck's front tire. The tire exploded with a loud bang, and the truck lurched to a halt. Keen was trapped. Beckett walked calmly over to the driver's side door and wrenched it open. He dragged the sputtering, terrified banker out of the truck and threw him onto the ground next to his men. "It's over, Keen," Beckett said, his voice low and full of contempt. "You're going to write down everything. How you blackmailed Levi, how you sabotaged the barn, how you sent these two here to kill a pregnant woman and steal her property. You're going to sign it, and then you're going to wait for the state police to get here, not your paid-off county sheriff, the state boys." Keen, stripped of his power, just sobbed. He knew he was beaten. As Beckett marched him into the house at gunpoint to write his confession, I leaned against the porch railing, my hand on my belly, my body trembling with adrenaline. I looked at the two men tied up on my porch, at the disabled truck in my yard, and at the man in my kitchen who had just saved my life and my home. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a hired hand. He was a guardian, a promise keeper. He had come here to settle a debt to his friend, and in doing so, he had become something more. He had become the protector of my family. And as the first contraction hit me, a low, deep wave of pressure, I knew that my family was about to get a little bigger, right in the middle of the storm. "It's time," I gasped, clutching the porch railing as the contraction radiated through my whole body. Beckett was inside, forcing Keen to write his confession, but he must have heard me. He was at my side in an instant, his face a mixture of concern and a strange, fierce tenderness. "The baby?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I could only nod, breathing through the pain. This was not how I had pictured this moment, not surrounded by defeated thugs and the wreckage of a failed attack. Martha, who had been hiding in her room as instructed, came rushing out. Her years of ranch life had prepared her for anything. She took one look at my face, at the two men tied up on the porch, and at Keen being held at gunpoint in the kitchen, and she didn't even blink. "Well," she said, her voice dry as dust, "looks like this baby is determined to make an entrance." She and Beckett helped me inside, settling me onto the living room floor with a pile of clean sheets and towels. The contractions started coming faster, stronger, one wave crashing after another. The world narrowed to the four walls of the room, to Martha's calm, steady voice, and to Beckett's hand, which was holding mine, his grip a solid, unwavering anchor in a sea of pain. He never left my side. He was a strange figure in this scene of childbirth, his face streaked with dirt from the fight, a rifle leaning against the wall near the door, a murderer writing his confession in the next room. But his presence was the only thing that kept me grounded. He murmured words of encouragement, wiped the sweat from my brow, and held my hands so tight I thought the bones might break. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't disgusted. He was just there, a rock, a protector. Through the haze of pain, I saw him not as Levi's friend, but as something new, something that belonged to my future, not my past. "She's turned," Martha said after a while, her voice tight with worry. "She's breech." Fear, cold and sharp, cut through the pain. A breech birth, out here, with no doctor, miles from a hospital. It was a death sentence for many women, for many babies. "Will she be okay?" I cried, my courage finally failing me. "She's a fighter like her mama," Martha said, but her eyes were grim. "But you're going to have to push harder than you ever thought you could." I pushed. I pushed through waves of agony so intense I thought my body would tear itself apart. I pushed with the memory of Levi, for the child that was his last gift to me. I pushed with the fierce, desperate hope for a future. And through it all, Beckett was there, his voice in my ear. "You can do this, Joelle. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You can do this." And then, after an eternity of fire and struggle, a cry. Not a weak, sputtering cry, but a loud, furious, defiant roar that filled the small house. A cry that said, "I am here." Martha lifted the baby, a tiny, perfect creature, messy and beautiful. "A girl," she announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy girl." She laid the baby on my chest and the world stopped. All the pain, all the fear, all the loss, it all melted away. There was only this new life, this tiny miracle, her heart beating against mine. I sobbed, tears of joy and relief and grief all mingling together. I looked up at Beckett. His face was a wreck of emotions. Tears were streaming down his own cheeks, unashamed. He looked at the baby, then at me, and his voice was thick with reverence. "I've never seen anything so brave in my entire life," he whispered. He gently touched the baby's head, his calloused, scarred finger impossibly gentle against her soft skin. In the other room, Richard Keene had finished his confession. The state police were on their way. The ranch was safe. My daughter was safe. We had survived. "She needs a name," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Beckett looked at me, his gray-green eyes searching mine. "I know a name," he said softly, "if it's all right with you. A beautiful, strong name. Rosalind." It was a perfect name. It sounded like strength. It sounded like a new beginning. "Rosalind," I repeated, testing the sound of it. I looked from my daughter's face to the face of the man who had delivered her, who had saved us both. "Her name is Rosalind Tatum," I said. But as I looked at Beckett, at this man who had come into my life as a stranger and become my savior, I knew deep in my heart that her name might not be Tatum forever. The storm had passed. The fight was over. And in the quiet aftermath, in this little house filled with the smell of wood smoke and new life, a family had been born. Not a family of blood, but a family of circumstance. A family forged in grief, tested by violence, and sealed by the birth of a child. As I held my daughter, I finally took off the wedding ring that had been on my finger for 10 years. I didn't set it aside with sadness, but with a sense of peace. The past was the past. Levi would always be a part of me, a part of Rosalind. But the future was sitting right beside me, his hand finally gently taking mine. And it was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you would have done if you were in Joel's shoes. Thanks for listening.